Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we will discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, we'll be taking up the first important article which talks about the issue of taxing the industrial alcohol which emerged between center and state governments and the recent verdict of Supreme Court on the same. Then in the second topic, we will examine the persisting challenges in the global supply chain, how it affects India and what are the steps which has been taken by the government to tackle the same. Then from your simplified section, we'll be taking up 5 important news articles and will be also be providing value addition for the very same, keeping the approaching prelims 2025 in the mind, so stay tuned. The Supreme Court recently ruled out that it is complete prerogative of the state governments to control the intoxicating and the denatured alcohol. And this issue which has emerged between the center and the state government to actually tax the industrial alcohol forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the themes of center and state relations as well as government policies and interventions. So before we dwell into this issue, let's first try to understand the distribution of legislative power between the center and the state government. So in our constitution, there are 12 schedules which you guys might know about. The first schedule, for example, deals with the names and the extent of the states and union territories. The fourth schedule tells us about the allocation of seats in Rajya Sabha. The 10th schedule provides for anti-defection law to deal with our honest parliamentarians. Similarly, the 7th schedule talks about the distribution of legislative power, that who can make law on which of the following subjects between the center and the state government. So first there exists a union list. A union list where it is a complete sole prerogative of the parliament of the country to legislate on the following subjects such as, for example, defense, banking, foreign affairs, currency, atomic energy, interstate trade as well as conducting the census. Then there comes a state list. A state list where under the normal circumstances, it is complete prerogative of the state government to make laws on the following subjects such as, for example, public order, policing, public health, agriculture, local government and markets. What do we mean by normal circumstances? Because there can exist certain exceptional circumstances such as, for example, imposition of precedent rule under Article 356 and 365 of the Constitution or imposition of national emergency under Article 352 of the Constitution, where obviously the lawmaking power of the state is compromised and the union takes over. Then there comes a kind of concurrent list. A concurrent list where both the center and the state has powers to make laws on the same subject. What are the subjects which has been kept here? Such as, for example, the criminal law, marriage and divorce, the population control and family planning, the electricity and your labor welfare. The idea is that if there will take place any kind of contradiction between the law made by the state government and the central government on this issue of concurrent list, then the law which has been made by the central government or the union will prevail over the state law. This was the reason that why the Indira Gandhi government with your 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976 actually transferred some of the important subjects from this state list to concurrent list such as, for example, forest, protection of wildlife, weights and measures, administration of justice, etc. So when we have understood the distribution of legislative power between the center and the state governments, now let's dwell into the debate which was taking place that among these two, the center and the state, who is empowered to regulate on industrial alcohol. First of all, try to understand that the term industrial alcohol is not specifically mentioned in the 7th schedule of the Constitution. The idea was, the argument of the state government was that under the entry 8 of the state list, the state can legislate on the production, manufacturing and the sale of intoxicating liquor. But the central government was giving the argument that under the entry 52 of the union list, the industries as a sector will be under the control of union if declared by the parliament in the public interest. And it was telling that this intoxicating liquor, which also includes your industrial liquor, this actually falls within the category of the industries which are controlled by the union under the Industries Act of 1961. And another argument which was being given by the central government was that in the concurrent list there is an entry, and that entry is 33. And under that entry there is trade and commerce and supply and distribution of products, including the supply and distribution of this industrial alcohol. So obviously if central government is making a law, it will have a more say over the state government's law. The state government's argument on the other side was that this denatured spirit or the industrial alcohol is actually being misused for the purpose of human consumption, leading to the various kind of huge tragedies, right? The huge tragedies. Such as, for example, one was very recently caused in Tamil Nadu, which actually led to the death of more than 100 people, and it caused a national furor, right? So what do we actually mean by this kind of huge tragedies which actually take place? So that is basically, this term huge actually stands for any kind of spurious or illicit liquor which has been produced of substandard quality, which is actually unfit for human consumption. This term huge actually is derived from an Alaskan tribe, Huchinu, which was actually quite infamous for making various kind of strong liquor. Keep this in mind that this liquor or this alcohol is actually created through a process called as fermentation. Fermentation of what? Your grain, grapes, sugarcane, etc. by the addition of yeast. And that basically leads to production of what? An absolute alcohol, and that is pure ethanol, the chemical formula of which is C2H5OH. And this has what? A minimal additive. Remember that the alcohol which is coming in your mind, that is a kind of a beverage, that has certain percentage of alcohol, right? 8 to 10%. So that is the composition of absolute alcohol. How the denatured or the industrial alcohol is different from it? Because in this ethanol, they start adding what? Your methanol, whose chemical composition is CH3OH, benzene and gasoline to actually increase the quantity of liquor. Now this normal absolute alcohol is actually drinkable with extreme caution, so we are not promoting that at all. The denatured alcohol on the other hand is completely poisonous and unfit for consumption. Both of them have distinct application as well. So for example, this absolute alcohol has a lot of laboratory use. For example, it can be used to extract some chemicals, or for example medical application, such as for example the sterilization of various kind of medical equipments. However, this denatured alcohol is actually used in the industries either as a fuel or various kind of extracting agents, and thus it is not used in the laboratories or in the normal medical application. Thus, when it comes to absolute alcohol, the chances are that the taxation will be more high because of its purity. However, with this denatured alcohol or the industrial alcohol, there is a lower tax rate because of the larger industrial use. So this is what exactly the governments of the states were saying, that this industrial alcohol is being used for the consumption, leading to these various kind of huge tragedies, and thus the state government shall be given control to just control this particular issue which is taking place. Now, is this huge tragedy a serious issue? Just look at the death which has been caused in our country because of the consumption of illicit liquor. Just look at its number in 2019. Even though the number has declined over the years, reaching to 617 in 2022, even then this is a very significant number. Just look at the young demographic dividend which our country is losing because of the consumption of this illicit liquor. There are various kind of issues which are actually prevail along with these huge tragedies which occur, which are basically caused because of the issue of alcoholism which persists. So when we are talking about this, kind of mixture of methanol in your ethanol, what does this methanol actually do when it enters in our body? So it basically releases various kind of byproducts, toxic byproducts, such as for example, ferric acid. What does this ferric acid do in our body? It basically lowers down our pH level, thus leading to a condition called as metabolic acidosis. And this metabolic acidosis ultimately transpires to less dissolution of oxygen in the blood cell. Thus, over a period of time, this alcohol consumption lead to various kind of issues, as for example, the cardiac arrest, the oral cavity which can take place, even leading to the formation of cancer, the fibrosis or cirrhosis which you guys hear with the issue of liver, the gastro and intestinal issues, the myopathy, the acute respiratory disease which it occurs with the lungs. So there are a lot of health impact associated with this issue of alcoholism. Then obviously there exists a lot of social impact, such as for example, if we look at the NCRB report, it tells us that alcoholism or the frequent consumption of alcohol is actually a major reason for the various issues of domestic violence. What does that lead to? That basically strains the social and the family relations as well. Now, the larger society has a kind of taboo associated with the people who drink such kind of alcohol, ultimately leading to what? Stigmatization, and this stigmatization ultimately transpire into the ostracization from the larger society, which obviously induce more criminal activities among these kind of people. The third is the economic impact. So see, when we are talking about this addiction of alcohol, why does this addiction actually takes place? Because when we drink alcohol, it actually releases a chemical in our brain called as endorphin. What does this endorphin stands for? This endorphin can be simply understood as it is basically a feel-good chemical for our brain. So that basically reduce down the stress level in a human body and actually release the happy components. So just imagine the kind of poverty which exists in our country. Just imagine the kind of hunger which prevails, right? For example, if we are ranking 105th in the global hunger index, or for example, if we look at the multidimensional poverty index, if India has 18% population which is actually multidimensionally poor, obviously these people are going through a lot of stress. Unemployment is one of them as well. As per the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, the unemployment rate in our country is currently as high as 9%. So all of that actually leads to these people, because obviously all of these issues require long-term action, which many of the people is unable to take. So what they do, they take a short-term respite, and what is that? That is alcohol consumption, reducing their stress level. So obviously that will act as a kind of drain on wealth. That will actually deteriorate the family's financial condition. That will also lead to high amount of out-of-pocket expenditure on health, which already stands at 70%, right, from the private sector. So all of these issues will ultimately lead to what? A dent on the demographic dividend of the country, as very visible from this particular graph. So when we are trying to become, let's say, Viksit Bharat, and our demographic dividend is actually lying in a hospital bed because of consumption of illicit liquor, obviously that is going to hamper the prospect of our nation's growth. Then obviously when we talk about this particular sector, let's say there is a particular village. In that particular village, some kind of distillery, a small micro distillery is set up to actually create this methanol based alcohol. Obviously regulation and inspection of such micro industries are very difficult, leading it to be largely unregulated sector. So what are the steps which government has taken to deal with this issue? First of all, the production, consumption, sale of methanol has actually been kept under the Schedule 1 of the Manufacture, Storage and Import of Hazardous Chemical Rules 1989. Thus, there is a kind of a strict vigilance on sale and purchase of methanol. Then, under the Food Safety and Standard Regulation 2008, there is a maximum permissible quantity of methanol which has been prescribed for various kind of liquors to actually ensure the safety of the people. Third is that there is a scheme for prevention of alcoholism which was launched by Ministry of Social Justice, and that has been merged with the National Action Plan on Drug Reduction 2020. Under the very same initiative, the government has also launched the Nasha Mukti Bharat Abhiyan, under which we are actually training the volunteers and the NGOs at the ground level, the grassroots level, to actually educate the people about the ill effects of alcohol. And under the very same initiative, the government has also launched the Operation Parivartan, which is basically what? A 4-point agenda for soft policing to actually kind of do the social engineering among the people to deviate them from such ill effects of alcohol and alcohol consumption. Coming back to now, when the states were actually demanding that they should be given this control over the industrial produced alcohol, let's see what the Supreme Court has ruled. Correct? So the history actually lies in the year of 1989, where Supreme Court in its Synthetics and Chemical Limited versus the state of Uttar Pradesh held that the state only have the power to regulate the intoxicating liquor which is meant for human consumption only, and that is only the center can regulate the industrial alcohol after the act, right, the Industries Act of 1961. However, in 1990, the government of Uttar Pradesh, it actually imposed a license fee for 15 paise per liter on the denatured alcohol which are obtained from distilleries. What Allahabad High Court did in 2004, it struck down the state notification relying on this particular judgment of 1989. Thus, the appeal was made to Supreme Court, and finally the verdict has been announced in the year of 2024, where the Supreme Court held in a 8:1 ruling. So 8 people were actually in the favor of the ruling, 1 was dissenting, that the states have the power to not just tax the alcoholic beverages but also this industrial alcohol which we were discussing about. Correct? So the excise duty which is levied on the drinking alcohol is actually a key component of the revenue by most of the states, right? So obviously that now the revenue of the state will increase as well. Also, it became an issue of federalism, right? The kind of a tussle which was taking place between the center and the state. Let's see what Supreme Court had to say about it. So Supreme Court said that there are 2 interpretations which are possible when the 2 entries in 7th schedule are overlapping, right? Let's say there is one in state list and one in the center list. When there are 2 possible interpretations, the Supreme Court held, then the court must choose one that maintains the federal balance. Correct? Such now intoxicating liquor under the entry 8, which now includes denatured alcohol as well, and the raw material for alcohol production will fall within the exclusive control of the states. Correct? So remember these points, remember these larger issue of huge tragedies which are taking place across the country. Remember the steps which we have discussed and try to solve this particular question. We move forward to the next news, where the editorial highlights the emerging issues in the global supply chain and 2-pronged strategy that shall be applied by India to tackle the same. These issues related to the global supply chain forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of economic growth and development. Let's first try to understand that how India has actually emerged as a rising player in this global supply chain which exists. And for that purpose, we are going to refer to the Forbes report of 2024, according to which India has become the 5th largest economy in the terms of nominal GDP, and by mistake, India is not the 2nd but the 3rd largest, so just make the connection. The 3rd largest economy in the terms of purchasing power parity. The first is China, the 2nd is USA, and the 3rd largest is India. So currently, what is the GDP at where we stand? It is very close to $4 trillion. The idea is that by the year of 2027 itself, we will become a 5 trillion economy. Further, the target is under the larger corpus of the idea of Viksit Bharat that by the year of 2047, India will become a $35 trillion economy, or the 2nd largest economy in the world. Do we actually have a talent pool to address the demand of Industry 4.0? The demands of artificial intelligence, the demands of big data analytics? Do we have the capability for that? The Forbes report 2024 states that indeed India has this talent pool with 2nd largest English speaking population, thus providing for the global integration, and 2 million graduates annually. Also, if you look at our logistic industry, it currently stands at a $215 billion market evaluation with the compounded annual growth rate of 11%. Our share in the global export, if you look very specifically, it stands at 1.5%. Though it's a slow number, but the idea is that we are actually growing to increase our our share in the export sector. With the, as per the Ministry of Commerce, the export which we had this year was around $63 billion. The idea is under the foreign trade policy of 2023 that by the year of 2030, India's export shall actually reach to $2 trillion. So that is the idea on which we are working upon. Also, the report states that because many of the countries are following a China plus one strategy, it is actually beneficial for our country as well. So what is this China plus one strategy? So when the pandemic started taking place, many of the countries started having a growing realization that they are over dependent on China for the consumption or for the import of the products. Thus, they actually started looking for an alternative market or alternative source for the products which they are buying, and this is where India can play a very important role. So decoupling or reducing the dependence on China stands for China plus one strategy. Now, when we have discussed so much about the potential of our global supply chain, the idea is that what do we mean by this global supply chain? So basically try to understand that let's say there exists a company A which is working in our country. This company A is actually importing semiconductor diodes from China and it is making mobile in our country. So the technological operation has been outsourced to, let's say, Europe. It is actually using the cheap labor from India, right? Let's say from UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, etc. And it is creating these mobile phones at a very cheap cost, and then it is transporting them via the rail and road network to the ports, let's say for example JNPT, which is basically the largest port which our country has in Maharashtra, in Mumbai specifically, and then it is exporting from that port to the Africa, which has a high consumer market for such cheap mobiles. So basically there is a kind of a supply chain, there is a kind of a manufacturing, there is a distribution network, and there exists a consumer market. And all of this sale, purchase of the good is actually taking place on a global level. Thus, it can be called as a global supply chain. That stands for definition. And what is the importance to actually have such a resilient global supply chain? So first try to understand that let's say I am a company A and I am actually importing the raw material for this mobile from a particular country where there actually exists a surplus. So obviously the input cost for my mobile is actually declining. Then what I am doing? I am actually using the cheap labor to whom I have to actually pay less. So thus overall the manufacturing cost of this mobile has actually declined, correct? So the idea is that with this, I will be able to actually do mass production of the products which I want, as well as also maintain a decent amount of quality. The second is that with such mass production and economy of scale, I will be able to put a competitive pricing for Indian products in the global market, thus making our products globally competitive as well. Right? Obviously, that will lead to increase in my market expansion and global reach as well. This was exactly what happened during the first industrial revolution, when the Britishers, they started importing in our country mass manufactured industries made product. And what did this mass produce industries made product did to our country? So because they were so cheap and also they had a kind of a fine quality, their demand increased in our country, ultimately leading to deindustrialization of our economy. Because if you look at the economic history of India, which has been written by R.C. Dutt, he states that by the year of 1886, 80% of the Indians, the clothes which they were wearing, 80% of those clothes had a British tag. Then obviously such large scale production will lead to innovation and expertise as well. That is also one of the reasons with the kind of the brain drain which we see in our country, where these global MNCs, they come to our country and they just take the best brains from our prestigious universities because they want to keep on innovating to actually produce at the global scale. Then obviously such large scale production expanded to many countries will lead to what? Quality control and standardization, an example of which can be McDonald's. Ultimately, let's say for example, if we talk a specific, let's say for example our inputs, we have to purchase oil, right? We are importing oil. So now when we are importing this oil, let's say India is solely reliant on the Gulf countries and there take place some dispute in the Red Sea. So obviously the prices of the oil will jump up. That will lead to imported inflation. The input cost will increase. The cost of our product will increase ultimately, and that will lead to what? The decline in the demand of our product. So let's say what we have done, we have actually diversified the source of oil which we are procuring, and we have started procuring from Russia through the India, Middle East, Europe corridor which India is planning, which will actually extend up to Russia. So with that, we are kind of importing the oil from this route, and this diversification will actually lead to less risk and thus better risk management. Also, it will create a lot of jobs and trade investments as well. So that is the importance of the resilient global supply chain. However, the article highlights that there are certain issues which India faces, first of them being the poor logistics. To show which, we are actually going to take the help of the World Bank's Logistic Performance Index 2023, in which our country basically ranked at 38. Just look at the tiger economies of Malaysia and Thailand, which stands at 26 and 34. Look at the ranking of China. Look at the ranking of United States, right? So obviously we are not faring that well when it comes to logistics. For example, the logistic cost in India is currently at $400 billion, which actually amounts to 14% of our GDP. This same logistic cost stands in US at around 9 to 10% and in China at around 9%. The global average stands at around 8%, and thus this difference between 14 to 8% actually stands for the competitiveness gap of around $180 billion. What do we mean by that? We basically mean that to just take the one product from place A to place B, let's say from India to Romania, we are actually investing $180 billion more than the country China. Correct? Then the transportation share when it comes to logistics, that stands for 6% of GDP. There are various components of logistics, as for example, warehousing, inventory, the order processing, etc. The transportation share itself is 40% of the total cost, or the 6% of the GDP. In which the road share, right, the amount of the logistics which we are actually supplying through the road, that stands at 64%, and the per ton cost is actually around 2.58 rupees per ton per kilometer. So obviously that is quite expensive. The actually more shorter, more expeditious and more cheaper railway has a only share of 30% till now. Then there are a lot of hidden costs as well, such as for example the excessive layer of distribution channels which exist, the inventory mismanagement, the lack of technology adaptation, which can be seen that how our ranking has actually reduced in tracking and tracing part of the logistic performance index. Then the inadequate demand forecasting. So all of that actually leads to high cost of inventory and warehousing, if you guys can see, almost combining to 7% of the GDP. Then in our country exists the poor quality infrastructure, because even though we have the second largest road network in the world, the logistics share, the national highway share in this total network is only 2.7%, and that is managing 40% of the traffic as well. So this is a major issue? Yes, absolutely. The poor performance of logistics sector. The second major issue is the huge import dependency we have. So let's say because we want to increase our export, but if we are too much import reliant on the critical minerals on which we are actually going to create the products, manufacture the products for the export, then when this import supply chain will disrupt, it will actually disrupt our exporting potential capabilities as well. For example, when it comes to critical minerals, just look at India's import dependence of 100% on lithium, 60% on graphite, 50% on lithium which we are sourcing from South Africa, Gabon, Australia, China, etc. And what does that actually transpires to? That actually transpires to the huge amount of trade deficit which we have. Such as, for example, currently this year itself, by the month of September 2024, we have registered a trade deficit of $20 billion. Just look at our increasing trade deficit with China, which currently stands at around $85 billion, with China being our largest trading partner. So obviously that is a major issue, right? The third major issue, which has been highlighted by the article as well, that there are certain emerging challenges. First is obviously that China wants to become the superpower. It wants to create a unipolar world, where it actually wants to become a production hub of the world. So it is creating a lot of disputes which are actually hampering the logistics supply, such as for example South China Sea dispute under the 9-dash line which it has, or the kind of debt trap policy which is actually imposing on other small economies. Thus they are becoming dependent on the China, and thus they will end up buying the products of which country? Obviously China. Such as for example the leasing of Hambantota port of Sri Lanka, or the kind of investment it is making in Africa. Then there is a US-China trade war which is taking place, such as for example the imposition of sanctions against China, which has appeared in the news as well, the 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs which were announced by the US, right, from competition concerns aimed at reducing their stake in the domestic market. This rising trade protectionism which has been adopted by various countries, such as for example European Union, in the form of what? Carbon border adjusted mechanism. Will it hamper the India's export? Yes, absolutely. Then there is a kind of a security challenges which are emerging in the region of Indo-Pacific, where almost 40 to 50% of our trade actually passes by. So that is also a major concern for us. Then there can be certain global spillover events, such as for example, obviously the trade disruption which was caused by COVID pandemic, or the sanctions which were put on Russia, thus leading to Russia-Ukraine war, the Red Sea attacks by Houthi rebels, leading all to the burgeoning oil prices. We are still almost 87% import dependent when it comes to oil. So all of that will actually hamper our manufacturing as well as our exports. Then there are IMF projections that there is already a slowing down of global trade by around 13 to 32%. So what are the steps which India has taken to actually ensure supply chain resilience? We can divide these suggestions or the steps which has been taken into three components. First is what we have done to actually improve our logistic. So there is a PM Gati Shakti plan where we are actually incorporating all the steps which we have taken in the various sectors to improve our logistic, such as for example Bharat Mala, Sagar Mala, or for example Udan initiative, which appeared in your mains 2024 as well. Also, we have launched a national logistic policy to actually streamline the logistic sector, to increase the infrastructural investment, as well as dedicated freight corridors, the 4 corridors which we have created, on which we are running the trains with at least a speed of 120 km per hour. The idea is that it will actually significantly reduce down the logistic cost. Then we have also done something to actually improve the manufacturing in our countries. So for example, we have signed bilateral trade deals with various countries, like for example SEPA, which was signed with United Arab Emirates, or recently free trade agreement which we have signed with Australia. Then there is a Make in India program. To actually improve the research, we have established the National Research Foundation, right, the Anusandhan, to actually kind of promote the innovation and research in state universities, or your National Semiconductor Mission to actually provide impetus on creation of fabrication plants in our country itself. Then we have also launched the Production Linked Incentive Scheme. What does the article suggest? The article suggests that India shall follow a two-pronged approach. From this, the just to be secure strategy, it can actually be put into a motion through something called as trust but verify and zero trust strategy. So it says that we shall follow a zero trust policy for critical technology sectors, such as for example the sectors which are most critical, which are being used by Indian military, intelligence agencies, or for cutting edge research and development. Then there shall be diversification of vendors, and friend shoring can be done. Friend shoring is basically when we actually use a friendly state and we start doing our export or imports from this particular country with the help of this country, signing an FTA with that. Then the Make in India, the idea of that shall be actually be transformed into Make in South Asia, and India can become a part of that. And also we need to promote the export oriented foreign direct investment in our country. Then we can also adopt just in case strategy for the diversification of vendors and friend shoring, as we discussed, and for the larger supply chain concerns and failout shall be also taken into consideration. So on the basis of this discussion, just try to solve this particular question and we move forward to the next news. Where with the rising pollution level, specifically in the National Capital Territory region, the Supreme Court has actually pulled up the center and has reminded that every citizen has the right to environment free of pollution. Let's first try to understand that is this air pollution a serious concern? Well, you guys might be reading such headlines in the news, such as for example how the Delhi, which has become the world's most polluted capital city again, and India currently has the third worst air quality out of 134 countries. If you look at the report released by World Health Organization 2024, 1 out of every 9 deaths and 7 million premature deaths worldwide actually occurs because of this issue of air pollution. If you look at the data specifically for our country, India is currently the third most polluted country globally. So just guys, just please comment down according to you which is the most polluted country in the world. Coming to, if you look at the annual PM 2.5 concentration, it currently stands at 54.4 UG per meter cube. Keep this in mind that as per the World Health Organization's report which it has released, if we look at the kind of AQG level which shall actually exist for PM 2.5, that is only 5 on annual level. We are at 54.4. If it comes to PM10, it stands at 50, right? So this data has been sourced from World Health Organization's report itself. Coming to the 96% of our population is actually exposed to PM 2.5, which is actually 3 times higher than the recommendation of World Health Organization. And if you look at the Lancet report, 11.5% deaths which occurs in the National Capital Territory, it is actually caused by the air pollution alone. Just look here, the 10 cities in our country currently which has the worst air quality index. Now, a question might be coming in your mind that how this air quality index is actually calculated, right? So, you guys are reading the headlines like this. Keep this in mind that this air quality index is actually calculated by the Center for Pollution Control Board, right? Where it basically calculates by setting up the various kinds of measuring device in more than 240 plus cities, and it basically calculates the pollution level on the basis of 8 pollutants. What are those 8 pollutants? The PM10 and PM 2.5, the NH3 that is methane and the PB that is lead, the carbon monoxide and your ozone, as well as sulfur dioxide and nitrous dioxide. Remember that a major missing here is carbon dioxide, which is not considered. So if you look at the air category or the air quality index as per for the Delhi, it is currently around 364. So where does it stand in the parameter which has been set by the CPCB? So if it is 0 to 50, it is considered as good, 100 satisfactory, up to 200 moderate, from 200 to 300 poor, from 300 to 400 very poor category, and then there is above 400 to 500 that is considered as a severe category. Now, what are the causes of this air pollution which exist in our national capital? The idea is, first of all, try to understand the geographical location of Delhi. So Delhi is basically bounded by Himalayas from the north and Aravallis in the region of west. So what happens that the pollutant air which exists here, it basically kinds of get trapped and it cannot be dispersed to the far-flung region. That is one. Second is the kind of desert dust storm or crop burning which take place. So what happens that this is the end of the Kharif cycle or the growing of rice, let's say. So the stubble which has been left, that is actually being burned by the farmers of the region of Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, right? Basically the green revolution belt. So they burn this stubble, right? Why? Because they do not have like large scale of mechanization and all of that. And this burning actually releases various kind of pollutants, such as for example NH3, carbon monoxide, various volatile organic compounds, and they actually come to the region of Delhi because of the westerlies which blow, the westerlies which actually originates from the region of Caspian Sea and Gulf, and they blow to this particular region, bringing the dust storm, and they bring these pollutant air to the Delhi as well. Then obviously the vehicular emission is one of the prominent reason as well because of the kind of overpopulation which has taken place. So remember, when we talk about the stubble burning which comes frequently in the news, it only amounts to 8% of Delhi's air pollution, not more than that, right? So there are various other factors, such as for example burning of crackers during the festival, the large scale construction which is taking place, the emission by the power plants and industries as well, correct? So what does the Supreme Court has held? Supreme Court has held that citizen actually has a fundamental right under the Article 21 of the Constitution, which provides you the right to dignified life, that you should have a pollution-free environment, right? So this idea of right to clean environment, it actually originated from the Stockholm Declaration of 1972, which is also considered as the Magna Carta for environment. Following the directive, the government at that time, under the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976, actually included 2 provisions in our constitution. One was a directive principle for the government, that was Article 48A, to actually protect the environment and safeguard the wildlife and forest. The second was a fundamental duty, the duty of the citizen to protect their environment. And this right to clean environment was further endorsed in your Earth Summit of 1992. Now, what does the Supreme Court is holding? That there is a specific section, that is the section 15 of the Environment Protection Act of 1986, which actually deals with the penalties for violating the act, but that has been rendered toothless because the center's failure to create this machinery to support this. Right? So the penalty mechanism which could have created under the EPA 1986, the government has not created a specific body for that. When we say that there is a fundamental right against this climate change, or let's say for example the kind of freedom which we have from the pollution which is occurring, how that was included in the constitution, let's have a look at that. Right, let's have a look at the constitutionalization of environmental issue. So it started with your MC Mehta versus Union of India 1987, where the Supreme Court held that the people have the right to live in pollution free environment as a part of Article 21 in MC Mehta versus Union of India 1987. Then came the rural litigation Kendra versus State 1988, where the Supreme Court held that every citizen has right to live in healthy environment. Then came your T.N. Godvarman judgment 1996, where the Supreme Court actually expanded the meaning of forest and included the preservation of various green expenses under it. Also, then came the Vellore Citizen Forum versus Union of India 1996, where the Supreme Court included two principles, being the precautionary principle and the polluter pay principle as well. So we have a kind of a extended producer responsibility under the various kind of, let's say, Plastic Waste Management Act, from where it is deriving the idea is being derived from the polluters pay principle, right? So what Government of India has done actually to tackle this issue? First of all, it has launched the Air Act of 1981 to actually curb the kind of pollution which is taking place. Then there is a crop residue management scheme, under which, let's say, there is a happy seeder which government is actually distributing to various farmers to not burn their stubble, to actually use this happy seeder. Then the government has also created a statutory body, Commission for Air Quality Management, which actually enforces the graded response action plan. Also, there are various steps which were taken by the government at the local level, such as, for example, adoption of BS6 fuel, which has less amount of nitrogen oxide or carbon monoxide. It releases less amount of that. Then there is, for example, the creation of odd even policy by the Delhi government. Just look at the the monitoring stations which has increased to actually measure the air quality index, which actually has reached to 514 in 2023. So these are the various steps which had been taken by the government. Also try to attempt this actually PYQ which appeared on the issue of constitutionalization of environment problems. And we move forward to the next news, where the rights body has actually been demanding the rollback of new rules for the disability certificates which the government has brought under the Right of Person with Disabilities Rule 2024, which forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the theme of government policies and interventions. Let's first try to understand that who is actually a disabled person. So according to World Health Organization, a disabled person is a person who is facing any kind of impairment, any kind of impediment in activity learning, or participation restrictions which are considered normal for other human beings. And if you look at the United Nations Convention on the Right of Person with Disabilities, these people, they actually form a kind of an invisible minority, with 1.3 billion people globally actually facing some or other kind of disability, 80% of which resides in developing countries and 70% in various rural countries. If we look at for India specific data, as per the census 2011, there were around 2.6 crore disabled people, actually amounting to 0.5% of our population. But as per the World Health Organization's recent estimate, this number has actually shoot up and might have increased to 5 to 6 crore disabled people. Thus, taking the cognizance of it, the government actually launched a Right of Person with Disabilities Act 2016, under which it actually specifically provided for 21 different types of disabilities, such as, for example, there is a locomotor disability, which deals with the people who have been victim of acid attacks, or for example, the person who has faced leprosy or polio. Then there is, for example, there exists an intellectual disability, such as, for example, a person who is unable to read or comprehend an information. For example, a person who is suffering from autism, right? So what are the provisions of this Right of Person with Disabilities Act 2016? Let's first try to understand that, to understand the issue which has featured in the news today. So it basically upheld the Article 14 of the Constitution, enlarges its meaning, and says that the right to equality also includes the accessibility and the reasonable accommodation of these disabled people. The Section 3 specifically states of the Act that no person shall be discriminated on the ground of disability. And it has also increased the quota reservation for these disabled people from 3% to now 4% in the government jobs, and from 4% to 5% in the higher education. They also have the right to free education under the Right to Education Act of 2009 for any disabled person from 6 to 18 years. Normally it is for 6 to 14 years, right? Then there will be also imposition of high penalties for offences against such disabled people, as well as there will be faster adjudication under the establishment of special courts. Now let's see what are the new rules which was brought by the government under the amendment rules of 2023. What are the new rules which the government has added? So there was a kind of a issue which was taking place, which you guys might have followed, related to Pooja Khetkar, right? An erstwhile IAS officer who actually used fake disability certificates to get into the services. Now, taking the cognizance of that, there are certain changes which the government has brought, such as, for example, it has notified amendment to the Right of Person with Disabilities rules, tightening the norms for getting a disability certificate now. And thus, there is a body for these disabled people called as National Platform for the Right of Disabled, or NPRD, who has denounced them and called for their withdrawal, right? What is the issue which they are saying? So they are saying that these new rules will actually lead to more exclusion of these disabled people from these government services, etc. Why? What are the new rules? The new rules will actually require the people with disability to mandatorily submit proof of identity. And only medical authorities will now be considered competent to actually receive and process this application for disability certificates, increasing the time taken to process each application from 1 to 3 months. So now these institutions will actually take a lot of time to decide whether such certificate shall be provided to you or not, correct? Also, the Rule 18, it actually allows for an application to lapse or become inactive if the medical authority concerned is unable to decide on it for over 2 years. So there is also a possibility of rejection as well, right? All this has been actually become from this particular issue which was taking place. But the body is saying what? The body is saying that that can lead to actually exclusionary issues which can happen, such as, for example, if we look at the various kind of disabilities which exist, just look at the number of people who are excluded from the labor force. For example, a visually impaired person is not, the percentage of them which are not in labor force is as high as 87%. Intellectual disability can actually lead to 94% unemployment. Also, just look at their low literacy level. Just look how meager number actually reach to graduates. So if they won't get these medical certificates, obviously it will act as an impediment for them as well, correct? So what the government has done, what are the steps which has been taken by the government for these disabled people? So government has first of all tried to increase their accessibility under this Sugam Bharat Abhiyan which the government has launched, right? Made it more accessible for these people. Then there is a Deen Dayal rehabilitation scheme for the rehabilitation of these people, getting them into education, providing them scholarships. The government has also launched unique disabilities ID card as well. Then there is a Spark project by the International Labour Organization where these disabled people, they are actually being skilled at the grassroots level, such as, for example, this project is currently being worked in Maharashtra. Also, there exists a GLAD network by UNESCO to actually champion the rights of these disabled people. Also, there are certain innovative local initiatives which you guys can quote, as for example, the Chhattisgarh government initiative, where it is actually providing reservation for disabled people in the panchayat election. So to increase their political participation, you guys can quote any and all of that in your answers, right? And we move forward to the next news, where a very interesting editorial appeared today which talked about that how it is very important for our country to actually induce the learning from the Constitution in your education curriculum, right? So let's see what are the debates or the arguments which has been made in this editorial and how you guys can actually use it in your mains part. So the editorial first of all provides some data about the India on the eve of independence. It says that the population of India was around 370 million or around 37 crore. The total fertility rate, which has come down to around 2.1, or the replacement rate now used to be around 6 at that time. The illiteracy was as high as 80%. There used to exist only 20 universities and 500 affiliated colleges, and the total number of population out of this 370 million which was actually enrolled in these education institutions was around only 2.5 lakh, to teach which there was a meager faculty of 20,000. However, if you look at our country now, obviously our country has become the country with the largest population in the world. 47% of the Indians are now below the age of 25. That is our demographic dividend. 2/3 have been actually born after the liberalization, that is after 1991, right? So there is a huge potential for this demographic dividend to contribute to the transformation of India as a society, right? The article suggests that the sole-minded focus on teaching this science, technology, engineering, mathematics subjects, or for example, limiting the education to only job opportunities and instrumentally applying knowledge for monetary gains without appreciating the intrinsic value of education in shaping the citizen's mind, which actually the Republic of India requires, that is actually going to harm us. So the article suggests that we shall inculcate the doctrines of constitution in our education curriculum, which also can be the part of the on the lines of the National Education Policy 2020. So let's see what article suggests. Article suggests that the constitution, why first of all it is included, because Constitution Act has a side for creating collective consciousness. It actually recognizes the kind of social and economic diversity which exists in our country and how they can actually contribute to differing economic and human development level across the state. So the framers of our constitution were actually very conscious of the imperative of creating a collective consciousness, a kind of an idea of unity and brotherhood, and they did that by providing flexibility and freedom to pursue a pluralistic idea. For example, let's say you have an idea A, I have an idea B. Both of us had the freedom of speech and expression under the Article 19 of the Constitution to keep our thoughts on the public platform, right? So there is a nation built upon the pluralistic view. There are various articles which actually reflect that. So for example, Article 14, the right to equality, both you and me are equal. The Article 19 which provides for freedom of movement, freedom of residence and freedom of speech. The Article 25 which provides for freedom to profess and propagate religion. Article 51A which actually directs to promote fraternity and brotherhood among you and me. Then the article suggests that the constitution has actually helped us to create a more and nurture and expand an Indian identity, which is basically the idea of assimilation. Many of its provisions focus on protecting rights and freedoms and illustrate their inherent purpose for establishing a nation, which is basically reflected in the values that are permeated in the preamble as well. So for example, the idea of justice. Justice of what? Social justice, political justice, economic justice. Political justice, for example, all of us can vote, right? There is an adult franchise. Social justice, for example, Article 17, abolition of untouchability. Or for example, the idea of liberty, fraternity, brotherhood. All of that actually permeates from the preamble itself, which was called by N.A. Palkhiwala as the identity card of the Constitution. Then the Constitution is a reason for celebrating the diversity of our country. So for example, its provisions on equality and non-discrimination recognizes the value of diversity, right? The Article 14, right to equality. Article 15, prohibit the state to discriminate on the citizen on the basis of several grounds. Can any one of you name down in the comment section what are the provisions in Article 15 on the basis of which the government cannot discriminate on you and me? Then it also recognizes that India is a land of diverse interests and multiple persuasions, correct? Fourth is that the Constitution is an instrument of social and political empowerment by abolishing untouchability in Article 70, by abolishing the titles under Article 18 of the Constitution, right? The Constitution shook the foundation of the practice of historically evolved caste-based discrimination. Or it also sent a powerful message that its foundations are the values of liberty, equality and fraternity derived from which revolution? Can any one of you tell? A very famous revolution, a revolution which took place in 1789, right? Then the Constitution as the basis for social justice. So universities are institutions where thought through the kind of transformative education, the societal structure can be challenged and a new generation can become participant in an effort to achieve social justice. This can be included as a conclusion as well. Right? So remember the quote of Firaj Gorakhpuri, who said that Kafile aate gaye, Hindustan banta gaya. So our idea of this article is that there is a kind of social justice which shall be prevailed. The India is the idea of assimilation that shall be incorporated in our education curriculum through your National Education Policy 2020. We move forward to the next things, where we are going to talk about a very important international institution which has actually appeared in the news. The institution being the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon. This UNIFIL, which was actually created through the resolution 425 and 426 of the United Nations Security Council. So remember that if there is a peacekeeping force which has to be sent to any particular country, that can only be done through the process of or the approval of United Nations Security Council. When it comes to this UN interim force in Lebanon, right, whose idea was to confirm the withdrawal of Israeli forces from southern Lebanon, in the southern Lebanon where the Israel and Hezbollah were actually fighting among them, right? And this southern Lebanon, which shares a border with Israel and has been the site of repeated conflicts between IDF and Hezbollah, right? IDF is nothing but basically the Israel Defense Forces. So this was created in the year of 1978. The idea is that India is the third largest contributor of troops to this UNIFIL. The first is Indonesia, the second is Italy. So the Indian battalion which has been posted there, they are called as INBAT, posted since 1988, and they have also taken various kind of construction activities in the region, such as for example creation of Mahatma Gandhi Park and Sardar Patel Stadium in the region of Lebanon. So just look at the Lebanon in your map, locate the kind of place which it has. It shares the boundary with Israel and which other country, just have a look at them, and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to talk about a scheme which has featured in the news, that too on the first page of the newspaper, and forms an important component of your government policies. The scheme being the PM-SHRI or the PM School for Rising India, which is basically a centrally sponsored scheme under which the center actually contributes the 60% of the funding for the normal states, and for the Himalayan and northeastern states it provides up to 90% of the funding. The idea of the scheme is to actually convert more than 14,500 schools into exemplary institutions in a mission mode scheme. So it is being run from 5 years, that is from 2022 to 27. The idea is in line with National Education Policy of 2020 to actually create smart classrooms, to provide for vocational training, to create or promote innovation through Atal Tinkering Labs, which has been launched by Niti Aayog, correct? Also, there will be a kind of a quality assessment of this school under the school quality assessment framework, as well as a kind of a competitive mechanism which will be created among the various schools in the district through the Unified District Information System for Education or UDISE plus data. So remember these salient features related to your PM-SHRI scheme. You guys can use this in your mains answer when you're writing about education. And with this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attend the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.